So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. I think William Gianobili is well known to all of you. He's Dean and Professor at Harvard University School of Dental Medicine. He's on the operating committee and one of the principal investigators of the Resource Center and serves on multiple ITP advisory teams to provide clinical input. Will has extensive experience conducting clinical studies in this space, and we'll talk about this critical success factor from an academic perspective. Take it away, Will.
All right, well, thank you so much, Jeannie, for the kind introduction. I'd also like to thank the NIDCR for the support of this program and for the organization of today's events. And so it's been a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to work with Jeannie Ann Brewster over the years. So I'm very happy that she's moderating our session. And she's been a critical component of our resource center as it relates to all of her depth of experience in the development of new dental technologies that can enter into the clinical arena. And I'm also very pleased to be a part of this whole program that includes Mike McGuire. And as you'll have a chance to see, Mike and I have had the opportunity to work together for well over 15 years in a variety of capacities, bringing together academic and private practice partnerships as it relates to clinical trials in the dental, oral, and craniofacial arena. And then I see so many good friends and colleagues who are a part of this panel that I've learned a great deal from over the years, from their experience in the regulatory arenas to their experience in taking new technologies into the clinic and having them adopted to help advance patient care. So in my presentation, I will just highlight what Dave Cohn he's given an excellent overview on the successes of the center. And also, as Dr. D'Souza had highlighted in her opening remarks, how these two consortia have really come together to advance early stage technologies to bring them to human clinical trials. And as Jeannie Ann Brewster so aptly mentioned, that's not really the end game, bringing it into the clinic. It's really looking at the adoption to be brought into clinical practice. And so I do think that the forward-looking, the vision of NIDCR was to really bring together individuals, engineers, people with technology expertise, with private practice clinicians, individuals who are seeing patients on a regular basis, key opinion leaders who can really come together to identify clinical needs and then bringing them together with these technological experts. And our goal as a center is to help transform patient care. And I think for so many of us here today, looking at how can we do this. So Dave highlighted this paper that came out last month. And what I wanted to bring your attention to is you can see that in these different stages of the program, the stage 2 and stage 3 of the program, the next key component is how can we bring not only to clinical trials, so this is really the exit of our technologies from this space. So we are starting to see different projects get to that point of preparing clinical trial protocols and preparing to go into the clinic for FDA phase 1, phase 2, first in human studies, pilot studies in the device area, and then looking at with the end in mind, again, as Jeannie had nicely highlighted, not only getting it into the clinic, but then preparing a technology that clinicians will find attractive and can have a benefit to patient care. And so that's much of our focus. And I think our panel experts that we have today will greatly assist us in having these discussions. And I think this is critically important because as we think about translational research, this overall, as we heard earlier, has not been so successful in all of NIH. You know, wonderful discovery science, better understanding basic science principles, and maybe doing a first in human study, but really translating that to the bedside or chair side has remained to be a big challenge. And there's just a very slow rate of new product development. And as Jeannie mentioned, both Mike and I serve on the FDA device panel, but we don't really have that many meetings to attend because new PMAs of dental technologies are actually quite rare to go through this pathway versus a 510K pathway. And so there have been those obstacles for new co-formation to eventually take on all of the risks of new dental technologies. I show this slide, and part of the focus of this whole presentation is this power of private practice academic partnerships. And this was a photo of one of our clinical research teams that was led by the McGuire Institute and Mike McGuire, and really showed a nice collaboration between key opinion leaders within private practice, along with academic investigators. And so as a part of my presentation, really highlighting how we can work together collaboratively. And I would say now as an academic, clinical researcher, there's no way that I would embark on a pivotal study without engaging private practice key opinion leaders. And so Mike and I, through our experiences, have had an opportunity over the years working in a variety of areas that have led to, in most of these cases, FDA approval and clinical adoption of some new technologies. So as we consider this clinical development of dental and medical products, it's a very long road. And the members of our panel probably know this the best, as many of them are innovators in the field that have brought these new technologies forward. And as we can see this new medicines timeline, if you consider from the initial stage of discovery in the basic science laboratory of a new idea, and then if everything goes as planned, to take this into all of the preclinical testing that's required before you would put this into a human being, and all of the regulatory steps that are involved. And you have going in parallel with this, all the intellectual property components and licensing and protecting the technology so it could be developed into a product, and then looking at running alongside all of that guidance with the FDA. You can see that it takes a significant team, and I have felt fortunate to be a part of our consortium that has really taken advantage of bringing together many of these experts to help with the new product development. And so this really takes a collaborative approach. And so as you think about at the individual investigator level, and recently our institution just underwent an external research review. And when one looks at dental schools who are embarking on clinical research, or private practice entities, or biotech companies engaging in research, what you can see is in the development of new investigational drugs or devices, there are so many different components that are critically important for the development of these technologies, where you need specific expertise on institutional review boards, having good laboratory practices for the non-clinical components of the studies, handling all of the compliance and disclosures of the investigators, labeling good, GMP practices, managing these tissues. And so with this, as we look at the regulations that are involved in dental technologies, it's important that you have that collective expertise in working together in teams, because this is a significant burden at the individual investigator level. And so here you can just see, just as a snapshot, and we have Kate Fuller, who's a part of our panel together, and we can see that there are so many different guidelines for FDA approval, European Medicines Agency approval, and looking at the development of quality standards and the national regulations for certain countries and regions for clinical studies. So as I highlight some of these advantages of working with private practices and academic centers, I think what I will highlight is from wearing my hat as an academic clinical researcher, is that there are many synergies that we have available to us by these collaborations together. And one of them, as we look at recruiting patients, those types of patients that we might find in a academic center versus those that we might find in a private practice setting, in a rural setting, a more of a metropolitan area, this can provide much more diversity of patient populations that might be more representative from a generalizable level. Also, the enrollment of patient populations within private practices and those involved in enrollment, actually, in general, I have found that private practices where a study team is highly focused may have a much more rapid enrollment than an academic center. And so there's a real opportunity to gain experience in the types and complexity of the patients in those different settings. Of course, in terms of infrastructure for regulatory expertise, academic centers really have such an infrastructure. Dave was highlighting the CTSAs and clinical trials offices at many universities have such depth and breadth. These end up creating very nice collaborations with the private practice settings, and where oftentimes the academic experts are critically important, whereas the key opinion leaders with this specific clinical expertise and understanding, seeing these patients on a daily basis, on the recruitment strategies that might be available, the calibration of the specific surgical technique that might be done in the private practice setting. And then you can have this strong collaboration if there are not only the clinical outcomes, but using a variety of other outcome measures that might be looking at tissue samples, analysis, protein biomarkers, other types of patient material that can interface very well with the academic center. And then it's just simply, it's an enriching experience, I have to say, at the individual level. I mean, it's mutually beneficial, and it's great fun to have these types of collaborations. And so as we think about the various steps involved in the clinical research process, looking at these different steps on study design, on the grants funding process, we see much of this has been developed as a part of our resource center activities. And then if we are able to make it to this point to submit to for an IND or an IDE, then there are many other components that need to be developed in terms of the ongoing study activities, many working with CROs and other groups to help support the groups. And then lastly, one of the areas that Jeannie and her team have been very successful in is looking at this adoption to clinical practice that oftentimes people are not thinking about up front. And that's where I think is a lot of our discussion. We will gain a great deal to discuss more and more about that, because that's usually actually in the end, one of the most challenging pieces is to see, and it's hard to predict oftentimes clinical adoption. So in terms of the experimental design, I touched on this without going into all of the steps involved in designing human clinical trials. These components end up being important in the practice environment that one is looking at. Again, in an academic health center versus the private practice setting. And these are issues that can all be discussed in terms of identifying patient populations, the experience of these types of clinical scenarios. Have you selected the right type of defect, the right type of patient population, age, clinical defect, past issues related to that, and resources available? So all of this might be even examined early on what that clinical study would look like. And so eventually, obviously the clinical study team is going to be critically important in terms of the overall structure of the principal investigator, and then all of the other clinical centers involved, study coordination, assistants, the laboratory technicians working with the groups. This is some, very, very basic background that others need to consider at both the academic center and the private practice center. So really having that team approach required for success. So really it will come down with clinical translation, all of these components are critically important and that are a part of our consortium, ranging from first and foremost, good science, good biological basis for the clinical scenario, the manufacturing, the commercial translation roadmap, the intellectual property strategy, the market need. All of these components have been connected within our program of our consortium, and all of these are being done in tandem to help support the clinical team to bring this into addressing the unmet clinical need that we have. And so because of these burdens that many of the investigators have, it's critically important to bring all of these groups together for a successful technology. And so as I get ready to close, I think that where the center has worked to help investigators, and we've just had another round of new ITPs that have come forward on the clinical needs advisory group, really working together, and we'll hear more from Mike on the practice-based research network and how he has worked with academic health centers, having the key opinion leaders and thought leader clinical experts, and then the collective expertise from the Avenues company that have worked with us very closely on different models of technologies that might have been better situated within the larger space. It could be a new bone anabolic agent used for the treatment of osteoporosis that might have an application in dentistry, different types of applications where the team has really helped us greatly. And so with that, again, I'd like to thank you for the time and the opportunity to present today, and happy to now turn this over to my friend and colleague here, Mike McGuire. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. I'm just going to briefly introduce Mike McGuire, who also probably doesn't need an introduction to this group, but Mike is the founder and chairman of the McGuire Institute. He's also past president of the American Academy of Periodontology, and he's built a very successful private practice in Houston with an emphasis on oral regeneration and innovative approaches. Mike's been involved with the Resource Center since its inception in 2017. He served on the operating committee and on multiple ITP advisory teams to provide clinical input. He's conducted clinical studies out of his practice and now also through his practice-based research network on most of the regenerative technologies that have been adopted in this space. Yeah, so he has an extremely valuable perspective to share with us. And
all right, if I can get over here. So, everybody see my slides? Jeannie, can you see? Well, I'm assuming that everybody can hear me. I want to thank you very much, Jeannie, for the kind introduction. Will, thank you for your excellent presentation. I've enjoyed, as Will said, I've known Will for, I think, 30 years and worked with him, for 15 years or so. It has been a pleasure to have the opportunity to work with the Resource Center, first on the operating committee and now as chair of the Clinical Advisory Board. And it's very much my pleasure also to be involved in this keynote event. I want to thank also Director D'Souza for the support, the NIDCR support of the Resource Center and the Resource Center itself, all the things that you've done. It's really opened my eyes also on a whole side of practice-based research and just research in general that has broadened my horizons as well. So, I as always, learn things every time I listen to Dr. Gianobili. You may know that he's dean at Harvard University. Has anybody heard of Harvard? Yeah, probably so. But it's likely you may not know much about the McGuire Institute or the importance or unique capabilities of practice-based research. Many people assume that we function somewhat like the national PBRNs or perhaps like Gordon Christensen's Clinical Research Associates, but that's not the case at all. By the end of the presentation, I'd like for you to have a better understanding of the power of practice-based research, that it's different from university-based research, that there are some trials that are best run in universities, no doubt about it, and others that are best conducted in practice-based research settings. And then, as Will said, there are other multi-center trials that are just perfect to involve both university and practice-based sites. I've been involved in practice-based research since about 1989, and the McGuire Institute, also known as IMAC, was founded in 2010. I started the network as a legacy project to help other full-time clinicians learn how to conduct high-level research in their office, something that I've done for many years. Currently, if you look at the map, you see we have 17 different centers consisting of 24 investigators. What we do, the Institute trains, well, we identify them, then we train the investigators and their research coordinators to have the ability to generate great research in the office setting. At this point, the investigators are a mix of periodontists and oral surgeons, which include kind of a combination of recognized KOLs and younger rising stars that we've found that we can count on for years to come. As you see on the slide, the sites are kind of evenly spread across the continental United States, from Massachusetts down to Southern Florida, over to Southern California, and up to Washington State. And we're letting the network grow organically based on the needs of our sponsors and the studies that present to us. We recently added 12 general practitioners as sub-investigators. And for example, as being part of the Resource Center, I've seen a number of interesting ITP projects, and some that kind of caught my eye were on pulpal regeneration. Well, if any of them actually come our way and look to do studies, we'll identify exceptional private practice endodontists who are interested in clinical research, and we'll add them to our network. Everything we do centers around the power of practice-based research and our unique ability to drive innovative clinical therapy to successful adoption. The Resource Center is all about helping you de-risk your project and successfully bring it to the point that you're ready to move into clinical trials. It's difficult. I've watched you guys doing it. It's a difficult process, but I have some bad news for you. Your challenges are not over at that point when you're moving into clinical trials. You have a whole new group of potential problems that'll be encountered between the initiation of clinical trials to widespread adoption of your therapy. And as some have said already, let's begin with the end in mind. This is what it's all about. Here, we're using LASIK as an example of adoption resulting to 400 million procedures worldwide. I mean, think about that. Would you like to have your therapy have 400 million procedures worldwide? Well, I've taken this page from BioLase's 2021 annual report, and in it, it's highlighting the importance of a landmark multi-center RCT that IMAC just completed and how the company plans to leverage it to facilitate corporate adoption and then on to direct-to-consumer. And I'll come back to this study later in the presentation, but I thought it would be appropriate to mention at the beginning, as already Will and Jeannie have, that well-done research, good science, is important, but it by itself is not enough to bring your project to widespread adoption. Great research is important, but it's the given. It's much like an ante in a poker game. It's the bare minimum to allow you to interplay, but the outcome is going to depend on everything else, and much of that I'll try to highlight in my presentation. So how does IMAC function? What do we do? Well, we're kind of plug and play depending on the needs of the sponsor. We can shepherd a study concept all the way from conception to protocol development, negotiate study agreements and budgets for all the sites, through IRB approval, study coordination, initiation, monitoring, and closeout, through biostatistical analysis with a report or manuscript submission, or all the way to publication, even helping you decide which would be the best publication to submit to the podium, or perhaps today your online presence where the concept can be unveiled as a clinical treatment reality. You know, some of our sponsors come in with studies and they have their own large research departments. All they're looking for are well-trained sites to run them in. But we have other sponsors that come in and they have really no idea how to conduct a study. So basically they want a lot of these things we offer, but we kind of plug and play depending on the needs of the sponsor. Practice-based research results in more rapid enrollment and completion of the studies, less loss to follow-up, treatment that takes place in a real-world environment in patient populations that are representative of private practices, resulting in evidence that's more generalizable to clinical practice, providing more rapid translation of new therapies to clinical practice. I admit that sounds like our mission statement, right? Well, let me give you some concrete examples of what I'm talking about here. And let's start with more rapid enrollment and completion. Why is that possible, and what does it really mean? Well, the subjects in the study are actually patients in our practices. We don't have to go out and recruit them. Therefore, more rapid enrollment. Also, we can batch surgeries or batch study procedures, doing 2 or 3 a day rather than 1 this week, 1 next week, 1 in a month from now, making us more efficient. Also, much faster IRB approval. We're able to get IRB approval generally in less than 2 weeks. Much faster than most institutional IRBs. And in fact, most everything is more efficient in the private practice environment. For example, we are hoping to use a university-based radiologist to help us conduct some digital radiographic analysis of pre and post-op radiographs. But before we can talk to him, he needs to sign IMAC's NDA, which has been under review by his university attorneys for about a month or 2. You know, institutional bureaucracy oftentimes slows a lot of things down, and in certain instances, we can help mitigate that. When you're a sponsor, time is money, and efficiency saves money and leads to completing studies on schedule. Less loss to follow-up. Again, because these subjects remain in our practices, they are our patients. And why is that important? Well, a lot of reasons. You power your study based on the number of subjects, right? And if you lose subjects during the study, your statistics or ultimately your claims become weaker. And importantly, less loss to follow-up also allows you to conduct meaningful long-term studies. I'm a private practice clinician, been in practice for 42 years. Long-term studies are important to me. Here are 2 studies that we published recently with long-term horizons. One that followed patients, if you're on the left of your screen, to 6 to 8 years, and the one on the right to 10 years. Well, you can only do that if these patients or if these studies take place in a practice-based environment, because these subjects remain in the investigator's practices. And this is a powerful benefit of practice-based research. Long-term studies provide highly relevant data for clinicians. To me as a clinician, everything works at 6 months. You know, I want to know as a clinician, how are things going to work out over time? And for all of our studies that we run through the Institute, we design them so we can follow them all long-term. And for the sponsor, not only does it provide important information, but also it's a study that can be done for little additional investment. And that's important as well. Treatment that takes place in a real-world environment in a patient population that's representative of private practice, resulting in evidence that's more generalizable to clinical practice. This is huge. IMAC produces real-world evidence. You know, a few years ago, the FDA upgraded PROS to the level of objective measurements, mandating that PROS be included in all future studies. Now the FDA is doing the same with real-world evidence, promoting its importance as more generalizable. And for many sponsors, this is a study criteria they're looking to fulfill, and IMAC provides it. Practice-based research is in a stronger position to generate this type of data than many university clinics. We have 24 investigators with over 400 years of combined experience in 17 different practices, 15 general dentists. Our investigators have more than 1,500 different doctors that refer to them. They perform hundreds of procedures every day. In our network, they have over 30,000 patients on maintenance programs with over 300 hygiene appointments a day. Well, that's a lot of numbers. Why are they important? Well, these numbers are the real world patients that the FDA was alluding to. They produce more generalizable results. In addition to that, having highly trained, experienced investigators, over 400 years of combined experience, is important. I mean, if it's you, do you want to go to a Vinci trained robotic surgeon or a second year surgical resident about to do his third case with the robot? And there's data to support that. Experience is important, especially true for technique sensitive surgical devices. Okay, well, over 30,000 patients in a maintenance programs with over 300 hygiene appointments a day. Wow, what a fantastic pool to draw from if you're studying things like caries prevention, restorative materials, oral hygiene devices, preventative agents. In addition to that, all of these real world patients also facilitate the collection of meaningful pros. Because of FDA pressure, most studies today incorporate pros, but there is a unique body of knowledge necessary to do this effectively. Collecting pros in your study is much more than just including a visual analog scale in your study. IMAC has considerable experience in study design and methodology that can successfully identify information important to patients, clinicians, and sponsors. For example, I've highlighted on the right of the slide a study that we published in which we identified the steps necessary in a clinical trial to collect these meaningful pros. And as part of that, we discovered a lot of interesting things, one that I have on the slide here, and that is, it is too late to ask questions about pain or discomfort at the 1 week post-op visit, which is typically set forth in most protocols. If you're asking about pain at a week to 7 to 10 days, you're not going to get good information. Those questions need to be asked much earlier, usually around 3 days. In addition to that, pros are just as important as real-world evidence to gain adoption. And I think one of the most important things about pros is that alternative therapies will likely be chosen based on pros and not on objective outcomes. You know, I've been doing this a long time, and I have come to the conclusion that probably we are not going to find alternative therapies that are as good or better than our gold standards. And alternatives are not going to end up having better outcome measures compared to these gold standards. The way we're going to choose alternative methods in the future, mainly based on pros. So it's very important that you're able to generate meaningful pros. Our investigators have published more than 525 peer-reviewed papers. Each year, our investigators provide, on average, 100 regional lectures, 55 national lectures, 20 international lectures. They're active at all levels of organized dentistry. Many are editors or serve on editorial boards of high-impact peer-reviewed journals. Well, why is that important? What does it mean? Well, it means that IMAC offers greater podium power or online presence, which can influence clinical adoption. You know, if you have these investigators on your study, as the investigators, they are powerful multipliers, practitioner to practitioner. And our investigators consistently publish award-winning manuscripts. Will showed you one of those, Dr. Gianobili, with us standing in a group where we were getting an award. Each year, the American Academy of Periodontology provides a single award to the publication that was seen as the most important in periodontics that year. And our investigators have been involved in studies that resulted in 11 award-winning landmark publications. These highly cited, often downloaded, credible publications very likely enhance more rapid translation of new therapies to clinical practice. Our study experience is across the board. It ranges from highly controlled FDA phase 1 and 2 drug studies to successful phase 3 biologic pivotal trials to post-marketing studies and registries. When I put this overview slide together, I have to tell you, even I was surprised that we have evaluated all of the things you see on the screen over the years. It's really incredible. You know, over a decade ago, when we were trying to decide about forming IMAC, we did an environmental scan. We cast a broad net to talk to a lot of people. We listened to organized dentistry, specialty organizations, university researchers, academia, practitioners, industry. And as a part of that, I remember a CEO of a company telling me about a study they had commissioned and how poorly run it was. She told me something I've never forgotten. She said she could accept a bad study outcome, but not a bad study. And that's always stuck with me. IMAC can generate the quality of the study, but not the outcome. Science is science, and the outcome is what it is. And as Jeannie mentioned, not all adopt. Sometimes we conduct a study and the sponsor discovers it's best not to proceed toward commercialization. Disappointing? Yes. But the less than favorable outcome can actually translate into important business information, saving the sponsor lots of money over the long run on a project that's just not going to be successful. As was said already, the goal is not FDA clearance, it is clinical adoption. And how do we achieve clinical adoption? You have to have excellent research, you have to have good science, but that's not enough. You have to have results that are meaningful to clinicians and patients. They've got to be meaningful. And as an example, I'm highlighting a landmark or award-winning study that we published a number of years ago. And this award-winning publication that we did provided definitive human histologic evidence demonstrating that demonstrating to clinicians that true periodontal regeneration over denuded root surface is not achieved by connective tissue graft. That's what they typically use. That's the gold standard. But it demonstrated that it is possible using GEM 21S, a concrete reason to suggest an adoption of a new therapy. This is the laser study I mentioned earlier in the presentation. This advertisement highlights the 5-center RCT that we just completed with IMAC. The study provided the first high-level scientific evidence on the efficacy of laser treatment compared to contemporary surgical therapy for periodontal disease. Now, prior to this investigation, there had been only very low-level, in my opinion, marketing-type papers on lasers and periodontics. The results of this study are meaningful and important to clinicians, and without a study like this, it would be much more difficult for many clinicians to adopt this technology. It provides the foundation for an evidence-based change in practice. And the sponsor sees the study as a critical early driver of adoption and a precursor to broader corporate adoption, and then finally to direct to consumer. IMAC can support US and Canadian and EU regulatory submissions. Based on the new EU regulations, it may now be more efficient and less expensive to actually conduct these studies in the US rather than Europe. And in fact, we just completed a multi-center RCT which generated data that was used to satisfy EU requirements. In addition, we're currently conducting a pilot study in South America, which will support an RCT to be carried out in the US, and a study from Japan on artificial intelligence. While most of our studies are conducted in our network, we've also partnered in multi-center trials with key universities that you see on the map. As Will said, this was when things really shine, when you're able to work with the universities. In addition to that, we also work with leading edge dental schools to provide our studies technical support using sophisticated measurements instruments, radiographic analysis, biomarker assays, and histology, and many other things. All of this showcases the powerful synergy of high-level practice-based research and academic research, both playing to their strengths. And when I put this map together, I said, whoa, what's going on with the West Coast? We need to work on that. No universities there. We're building the capacity to manage in-depth survey data and extended registry user data. This will reinforce the generalizability of the controlled study data generated by our master clinician network investigators to a much broader population of practitioners. And it's going to feature IMAC's unique ability to track and generate long-term data through the network, which is something university studies typically have difficulty doing. You know, oral health is connected health. We're not going to have to ask our patients, are they following the protocol's home care instructions? Their connected toothbrushes will tell us that. We're not going to have to remind them of the importance of compliance because our artificial intelligence app on their phone will be encouraging better health-related behaviors. This will have applications to any chronic disease, whether it's oral or outside dentistry. Some of this we're doing now as part of our AI study, and others will be bringing on soon. We're taking this opportunity to build a data-driven, digitally connected health ecosystem, improving our ability to connect with our network, our study subjects, industry, academia, organizations, all to develop products and services for the next generation of global health and wellness. So to conclude, you've seen this slide 3 times. It's an illustration from Taylor All's paper in JDR, a great paper. I really thought they did a great job. And this is a super schematic representation of how the Resource Center is doing everything they can to help you bridge these multiple valleys of death that they call them, points at which your project is particularly vulnerable, and to help make your project clinical trial ready. And it's this end of that is your next critical step, to choose that appropriate partner to run your clinical trial, to drive your innovative therapy to successful adoption. I've tried to highlight the power of practice-based research and how we can drive innovative clinical therapy to successful adoption. Yes, IMAC conducts world-class research. That's important, but it's not enough. Along with that, our studies also provide real-world evidence, which the FDA is demanding, which results in meaningful outcomes, important both to clinicians and research and patients alike, verified through PROs, and permits the collection of long-term data, which validates the importance of your technology. And finally, we have key influencers as investigators in the studies, which serve as powerful multipliers influencing clinical adoption. Artificial intelligence and connectivity will allow us to do all of these things better in the future, and practice-based research is the future. It will position us to identify that next big thing and ensure its adoption, which will be the game changer that we're all looking for. IMAC is unlocking the power of practice-based research, and we invite you to join us on that journey. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to questions as things follow through the rest of the afternoon. Thank you, everybody.